Welcome back to the Shuffle Squad. Zach Lesage here. We're going to be covering over the top 10 best decks as we head into Frankfurt and Monterey regionals. So whether you're playing at those events or you're playing locally, this list should give you a pretty defined top 10 best decks. I've been using information available from online tournaments, the results of the World Championships, and of course, my own results from local events. Kicking off our list, we have En's Zorak EX. Now, En's Zorak EX did pretty great at the World Championships, with Gabriel Fernandez making all the way to the finals in Seniors Division. Falling a little bit short of that victory, but showing that this deck is fantastic. We're kind of in a position where there's not a direct number 10 deck, and this deck seemed to edge out a few of the other decks in the format. So being able to use trade, discarding whatever you need to discard, attaching energies with Janine's Secret Art, and of course stopping your opponent Goldango with Toad Scroll, being able to stop that superior energy retrieval, and a few other cards too. This deck kind of works as hitting 170 with Reshiram, or you're able to do based off the damage counters on your En's Zorak EX. So that you're either knocking out your En's Zorak EX, or you're kind of knocking them out back. So it works out to a favorable trade against most matchups. However, this deck can just lose to some top decks. I think that En's Zorak is going to continuously have a place into our format. Is it absolutely the best? Probably not, but it can definitely sneak up into the top. All the lists are going to be available in the pinned comment. You can add them right into your My Limitless account, and then eventually copy and paste those into PTCG Live. Let's see what we got going for the rest of this list. Bringing it up into number 9 is going to be EV Box. Now, EV Box has seen success basically since Monterey last season. It's kind of when the deck kind of popped off. It's had a bit of a quiet spell heading into the World Championships, but still had a few Day 2 appearances. Now, where this deck gains its strength back is having a decent bit of attackers against the metagame. You have Flareon EX, which is great against Goldango. You have Leafeon EX, which is great against Grimmsnarl and Charizard. And you have Sylveon plus Eliza Clefairy to do well against any of the Dragapult decks. This deck already has a natural strong matchup against Raging Bolt, so you can see it's pretty decently well positioned. So why is it so low? Well, there are some consistency issues with this deck, and it is quite skill-based across the board. The list has largely remained the same, so it's been one of the kind of top decks available in format, but it's just not necessarily seeing the play rate to really push it through. And also, its consistency issues can sometimes show, making it a little bit more of a difficult choice. If you know what you're doing with this deck, it can definitely be strong. Pulling slightly ahead of EV Box is Terra Box. Now, Terra Box has kind of been a little bit dormant, but with players cutting Shaman out of a lot of their decks, it's kind of the time for the deck to spring into action again. List isn't really looking any different from what it did before, just kind of gaining its meta placement back due to lack of Shaman. So Gardevoir, when Riley's list, not really playing it. Dragapult Dusknoir that we saw in finals, not really playing it. And you already have a decent matchup against a lot of other decks in the format. So if we look towards Wellspring being able to use Torrential Pump, then going into the Pikachu EX gameplay, then maybe finishing off the game with Lily's Clefairy or Blood Moon or Saluna EX, that strategy stays really strong in this format. It's a little bit down on this list similar to EV Box because it has the same consistency problems. We have seen a couple players out here locally in Montreal who've been playing this deck with Double Ditto and Triple Fan Rotom. We'll have to see if that continues to be a theme or if it's going to be their own spicy tech. However, I do think that Wellspring in Terra Box seems to be a strong choice as we approach the first set of regionals. Charizard EX makes a list at number 7 after its strong performances at Worlds. We see that Oywind made all the way into the top 8 of the World Championships. Maybe it was top 4. Either way, top cut at Worlds with the Charizard, Dusknoir, Pidgeot with Briar. I do like the Briar package in this version of this deck because previous versions were not running Dusknoir, they were not running Briar, and now having the Dusknoir Briar package in the deck does pack a punch that can just end games, giving this deck a pretty strong Goldango matchup due to having Chiyu, Charizard, and Dusknoir all as options to OHKO Pokemon. Of course, there's that Max Belt that can also get in there. Now, Pidgeot being the backbone of this deck, being able to search out whatever you want with Quick Search, gives you a lot of power to do whatever you want in the middle of the game. So it's kind of hard for your opponent to go after a Pidgeot when there's a Dusknoir in play that can be popped and take a knockout on one of your Pokemon, and a Charizard EX. Of course, there are ways to play around this deck, but it's not always as easy as it seems. Charizard is placed a little bit lower due to a lot of the Goldango versions playing prize manipulation, giving itself a chance against this build on top of other general matchup spreads that makes Charizard fall a little bit short of being in the middle of this list. Almost at the halfway point of our list, we have Raging Bolt EX, where I thought it was placed a little bit better in our format a few weeks ago. I think it's kind of slipping through the cracks as decks find ways to have answers against Raging Bolt EX again. Dragapult, where it took a minor dip after its second place at Worlds, is kind of back on top of the metagame after people realize that we would like to be countering the decks that we're now countering Goldango. So it's kind of this cyclical format of Gardevoir is probably the best deck in formats. Decks try to counter Gardevoir. That ends up being Goldango decks. Decks try to counter Goldango. Those decks end up countering the Goldango decks are going to be Dragapult decks for the most part. And that's where this deck struggles a little bit against the Dragapults that have been seeing success as of late. Does that mean Raging Bolt EX is a bad list or a bad deck? No. I think that Raging Bolt is in a fine position, pretty middle of the road approach, where you have decent enough matchups against everything to be relatively stable in a regional championships environment. However, sometimes the deck falls a little bit short on the consistency scale, something that you might want to note with any of these Noctowl decks. Slitherwing is my preferred fighting type choice in this deck over Cornerstone and Koraidon. Regardless of how we're placed at Worlds, I think Slitherwing is a great answer into the Pikachu EX decks that you'll run into when you're running into Terra Box and Joltik Goldango. Coming in at a low number 5 this week is going to be Dragapult Dusknoir. Now, it's kind of hard because all the decks in the top 5 are pretty much top tier decks in format. And this version's running a little bit lower because there's a new entrant into the top 5 this week that has been making some waves at online tournaments that I think is a pretty good matchup against Dragapult Dusknoir. Not a 100% auto win, but there's a handful of decks that I think are doing pretty well against Dragapult Dusknoir. However, this deck is well positioned enough in the metagame, similar to Raging Bolt, where you're able to counter most decks in the format, can handle your own, and this would be my good general approach at the metagame in any scenario. I think that Dragapult Dusknoir can hold its own in a random metagame, so whether you're driving 2 towns over, an hour away for a cup, or going to a regionals, this deck seems like it can certainly hit. Maybe you'll run into a bunch of bad matchups, kind of like what I did at Worlds, or you could end up having a strong run and be like Justin Newdorf and make it all the way to the finals. Still going with that Worlds finalist list seems like the best choice at this time. We might be able to cut down to 1 jamming tower depending on how much we're seeing of regular Goldango. However, I do like the double jamming tower when it comes to this list to trap Genesect up in the active position. Speaking about new entrants on this deck, we have Dragapult EX with Toedscruel on this list. Now, this deck has been absolutely running rampant at some online events and having some back-to-back-to-back winning placements. Being able to use Toedscruel to stop your opponent from using superior energy retrieval, Night Stretcher, and more gives you a lot of opportunities against Goldango, Dragapult Dusknoir, and a handful of other decks on this list. Now, piloting that with Dragapult EX behind it and Monkey Dory, basically straight Dragapult, gives you enough control where this might just be the better version of where Enzoric at number 10 is. And you can see they have a similar approach. However, Dragapult's been largely more successful in the format. So I think that this build is something that we're going to see experimented from some top players at Frankfurt, Monterey, and Pittsburgh. So if you're preparing for any of those events or trying out a new Dragapult deck locally, this one seems to be pulling a little bit ahead of the Dragapult Dusknoir. We could see that change over the week. However, I do believe for Pittsburgh, we will see a handful of players on this deck that will have some fairly deep runs. Watch out for this one. Coming in at number 3, we have Joltik with Goldango. Now, this build's been absolutely popping off lately, and I think that it's really well positioned in the metagame. This is the deck that dethroned Gabriel Fernandez as becoming our world champion for back-to-back years and having a perfect season, and having access to Jolting Charge, powering up either Iron Hands or Pikachu EX depending on the matchup, gives you a lot of power to just get those energies out in play, get that attack off, your opponent knocks them out, then you play the deck behind the scenes as a Goldango deck with superior energy retrieval. So I think it gives you a lot of power where you're like, okay, cool, we got Joltik box in the front, Goldango in the back, change up the matchup spread, and as long as you're able to set up with this deck, it seems like it's absolutely one of the best decks in format. I know all over our cups and challenges here in the Montreal area, it's been absolutely dominating, seeing multiple wins, top cup placements, and more, and I've seen that online as well. So if you haven't played against this one, or if you haven't built this up, I do recommend to do that because it is the hot new deck. I took apart my Joltik box deck and put this deck together. Our runner-up deck is actually going to be Riley McKay's Worlds winning deck. You might be like, why is Gardevoir at number 2 when it won Worlds? Well, the way the metagame is shifting, there's plenty of decks that are countering Gardevoir because we're aware that Gardevoir won Worlds. It's not just going to be the fact that Gardevoir won Worlds and it continues to win everything else. Players are going to take notice of that. So we might see more players play Gardevoir in general, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to see less Goldango or Goldango Joltik or Charizard decks. The metagame very much understands where Gardevoir's placement is, and Gardevoir continues to do well. However, Gardevoir is looking more of a Raging Bolt and Dragapult metagame than it wants to see a Goldango and Joltik Goldango metagame. So if we look towards the top end of the meta, Gardevoir does struggle a little bit, which is going to lower its placement from number 1 to number 2 this week. There's not really much else that I want to change for this. You could decide to go for a Drifloon approach by cutting Fluttermane and then cutting Technical Machine De-Evolution for a second Bravery Charm. However, I do really like where this list is at in terms of like seeing success. So it's really probably going to be this list or bust right now. Our number 1 deck of the week is going to be Goldango EX with Togekiss. Now, I appreciate all y'all for letting me know that it's not Togekiss and that it is in fact Togekiss. I thought about it. You're right. I was wrong. We move on. This build, very similar to Piper Lapine's version at Worlds. I decided to add in a Technical Machine or Team Rocket's Venture Bomb. I always get those two TRTM confused into this list, and adding back in a Counter Catcher to make it a little bit easier for me to kind of catch up on some prize cards with the Togekiss. I decided that I like the Togekiss version for prize manipulation the best out of this and Chansey, because while you need more to set it up at once, you could play this deck as straight Goldango, whereas the Chansey version, you have 3 kind of dead Pokemon that you could start with a little bit more often, and you're a little bit more combo focused. I found that this version is a little bit more consistent. So if you're looking for a consistent Goldango deck, this is pretty much going to be the best one. And I've seen it win a bunch of League Cups, seeing it played all over, and get a couple coin flips with Wonderkiss, and you are all good there. That's what we've got going on for our list this week. I'm going to try to get up 3 videos next week. I made a post on my X account, but I've had a bit of a struggle with being on some new medication that's made me pretty exhausted. On top of, I fell down my stairs, which caused some damage to my knees and my foot. Been recovering that off. On top of that, my daughter had her first birthday, had some family over there, and after Worlds, I had a post-convention center flu or mystery illness that has been basically kicking my butts. So out of that, I played in a couple League Cups, League Challenges whenever I felt up to it, making sure I wasn't going to get anyone else sick. Kind of struggled through it all, and that's come to the cost of some videos and some content. But we have some content coming up on the Shuffle Squad for articles today and tomorrow and Wednesday. I'm traveling to Mexico for regionals as I'm posting this video. So right now it's Tuesday night. I'm leaving in the wee hours of the morning, and I hope that you all enjoy this video. Stay tuned for more great stuff. Hit me up for some coaching if you're looking to get some help for Pittsburgh regionals or for your next local event. And I'll catch up with all y'all soon. Peace out and have a great one. Want to support the Shuffle Squad? Be sure to check out all of our sponsors in the description to pick up Pokemon TCG singles, sealed, and PTCG live codes. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed the content that we have today, and maybe you'll click on one of these other videos, enjoy those videos too. If you haven't already, give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments what video you want to watch next. Until next time, we'll catch up with all y'all later. Have yourself a great day.